There are moments in life when a person stands before a choice so profound that whatever they decide, their entire inner world will change. From the outside, it may look like an ordinary decision, a message sent, a door opened, a relationship ended, a person finally returning, a truth finally spoken. But beneath the visible event, something much deeper is taking place. The unconscious is making a choice, and sometimes the most important choice another person can make is not choosing between two people. It is choosing between the life they have been living and the life their soul has been calling them toward. They imagine a soulmate as someone who simply arrives, makes everything beautiful, removes loneliness, and completes every unfinished part of your life. But psychological reality is much more complicated. A meaningful connection does not always bring immediate peace. Sometimes it awakens everything you have spent years avoiding. It exposes fear. It reveals insecurity. It challenges old patterns. It forces you to confront the parts of yourself you would rather keep unconscious. That is why certain relationships feel different from ordinary relationships. You do not simply meet the person. You meet yourself through them. They become a mirror, and what you see in that mirror can be beautiful. Meet yourself through them. Perhaps you recognize a part of yourself you had forgotten. Perhaps you suddenly understand what you truly want. Perhaps you realize that the life you built around comfort was never the life your soul wanted. And this is where the biggest choice begins, because every human being eventually reaches a psychological crossroads. One path leads toward familiarity, the other leads toward authenticity. Familiarity feels safe, even when it hurts. Authenticity feels dangerous, even when it is right. The ego prefers what it knows. The soul moves toward what is true. This conflict exists inside almost every major transformation. They can awaken this conflict with extraordinary intensity. You may suddenly find yourself thinking about them when you never expected to. You may remember conversations that seemed ordinary at the time, but somehow stayed inside your mind. You may feel that their presence touched something deeper than attraction, something difficult to explain. Perhaps they made you feel seen, not admired, not desired, seen. And being truly seen is one of the most powerful psychological experiences a human being can have. Because the persona can fool the world, but it becomes difficult to hide behind a mask when someone recognizes the person beneath it. They do not simply make you feel loved. They make you question the person you have been pretending to be. Suddenly, the old life feels different. The old routines feel empty. The old relationships may begin feeling incomplete. The old excuses stop working, and the person who once avoided difficult decisions begins standing face to face with them. This does not mean every intense connection is destined. It does not mean every powerful attraction is proof of fate. The psyche can create powerful projections. We can place our deepest hopes onto another person. The deeper question is, what is this feeling revealing about me? Perhaps the person awakened your courage. Perhaps they revealed your fear of abandonment. Perhaps they showed you how badly you wanted genuine intimacy. Perhaps they forced you to recognize how much of your life had been built around avoiding vulnerability. The person becomes important, but the transformation becomes even more important, because the true purpose of a profound connection may not be to possess another human being. It may be to awaken something inside yourself. And sometimes, the person who awakens you must make a choice. Not necessarily choosing you, but choosing truth. Because if they choose truth, they can no longer continue living according to fear. They can no longer pretend they are satisfied when they are not. They can no longer remain inside relationships that have become emotionally empty simply because leaving would be uncomfortable. They can no longer keep postponing the life they secretly desire. The unconscious eventually demands honesty, and when that moment arrives, a person may appear to be making a decision about another human being, but beneath it, they are deciding who they are going to become. Think of a person standing before two doors. Behind the first door is everything familiar, predictable, safe, the same fears, the same identity. Behind the second door is uncertainty. There may be love, there may be loss, there may be transformation, there may be disappointment, but there is also something the first door can never offer: authenticity. The ego says, "Stay where you are." The soul whispers, "Become who you are." This conflict can last for months, sometimes years. A person may move closer, then retreat, open their heart, then become afraid, even when they know those identities easily, even when they know those identities are no longer serving them. The old self fights for survival. It reminds them of everything they might lose. It creates fear. It creates doubt. It whispers, "What if you regret this? What if you are wrong? What if the future is worse? What if you lose everything familiar?" And yet, somewhere deeper, another voice remains, quiet, patient, persistent. It says, "What if this is the life you were always meant to live?" That voice is difficult to hear when the ego is screaming. But once consciousness becomes strong enough, the whisper becomes impossible to ignore. This is why the biggest choices often happen after long periods of silence. Their entire identity is being reorganized. They are deciding what must remain and what must finally end. Perhaps you have wondered why someone important to you became quiet, why they suddenly seem different, why they appear to be struggling with a decision they refuse to explain. Do not immediately assume silence means indifference. Sometimes silence is where the deepest decisions are made. The unconscious needs space. Before a person can choose a new life, they must first understand why they are afraid of leaving the old one. And perhaps that is what is happening now. Perhaps the biggest choice of their life is not about whether they love you. Perhaps they already know what they feel. The real question is whether they are courageous enough to live according to what they know. Because knowing the truth and having the courage to act upon it are two completely different things. And when those two finally become one, a person's entire life can change. There is a moment when a person can no longer run from their own truth. They may delay it. They may distract themselves. They may tell themselves that everything is fine. They may even convince everyone around them that nothing has changed. But the unconscious does not forget. It keeps returning the same question: how long will you continue living against yourself? This is where the greatest choices of life are born. Not from certainty, from exhaustion with pretending. A person can tolerate an unhappy situation for years. They can tolerate emotional distance. They can tolerate a life that looks perfect from the outside, as long as they can keep telling themselves a story that makes it bearable. But eventually, the story stops working. Something inside them becomes louder than their excuses. Perhaps it happens during a quiet night, perhaps after a conversation, perhaps after seeing someone they deeply care about, perhaps after a work, eat, sleep, fulfill responsibilities, repeat. From the outside, everything appears normal, but inside, a part of them has been waiting for permission to feel, to dream, to love, to become. A profound connection can awaken that sleeping part, and once awakened, it becomes difficult to put back to sleep. This is why the person may begin questioning everything. Is this really the life I want? Why have I accepted so little? Why am I afraid to change? What would happen if I finally chose what my heart knows? These questions are not simple, because every meaningful choice has consequences. That choosing yourself may mean leaving behind an identity that others became comfortable with. And this is where the concept of the soulmate becomes psychologically interesting. The soulmate is not necessarily the person who completes you. Sometimes, the soulmate is the person who awakens you to the parts of yourself you abandoned. They may make you uncomfortable. They may challenge your assumptions. They may force you to see how much of your life has been controlled by fear. They may awaken qualities you thought were gone: courage, tenderness, vulnerability, desire, creativity, hope, and sometimes they awaken grief, because when you find this can create an extraordinary emotional conflict. One part of the person wants to move forward. Another part wants to return to safety. The conscious mind says, "I know what I want." The unconscious says, "But what will happen if you choose it?" This is why people sometimes move toward love, then suddenly pull away. They may not be playing games. They may be fighting themselves. The old identity is defending its territory. It says, don't risk everything, stay where you are, keep everyone comfortable, do not make a decision that cannot be undone. But the deeper self is asking something else. How long can you remain in a life that no longer represents you? There comes a point when doing nothing is still choosing, staying silent is still choosing, remaining in the familiar is still choosing, and sometimes the person realizes that avoiding the truth has already cost them more than facing it ever could. That is when courage begins. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is the decision to stop allowing fear to determine your future. A person can be terrified and still choose. They can be uncertain and still move forward. They can know that something may hurt and still choosing. They can be uncertain and still move forward. They can know that something may hurt and still move forward. Even if the person tries, they now know too much. They have seen themselves clearly. They have experienced what authenticity feels like, and the unconscious remembers. This is why some connections remain psychologically significant long after physical distance appears. The relationship may change, the circumstances may change, the people may even separate, but what was awakened inside them cannot simply be erased. The person may have discovered a new version of themselves, and that discovery belongs. The deeper question is, who am I becoming because this person awakened something inside me? That question returns the power to where it belongs, within yourself. Because if you make another person responsible for your wholeness, you remain dependent. But if their presence awakens you to your own wholeness, then the connection becomes transformative. You stop waiting for someone to save you. You begin saving yourself. And strangely, that is often when love becomes most authentic. Because two incomplete people may cling to each other out of fear, but two conscious people can choose each other from freedom. There is an enormous difference. Fear says, I need you. Freedom says, I will not abandon myself if you do. Fear says, complete me. The self says, meet me. Perhaps the biggest choice your soulmate is making is not simply whether to choose you. Perhaps they are choosing whether to become conscious enough to love without fear, and that decision cannot be forced. You cannot make another person awaken. You cannot argue someone into courage. You cannot convince someone to choose authenticity. They must reach that threshold themselves. All you can do, because the moment you stop placing your life on hold, something changes. You stop chasing. You stop forcing. You stop interpreting every silence. You stop trying to control the outcome. You begin living. And perhaps that is exactly what the other person needed to see. Not someone waiting helplessly for them, but someone who chose themselves. Because real love does not demand that you stop living until someone else makes a decision. Real love does not demand that you stop living until someone else makes a decision. Choosing truth, choosing growth, choosing themselves, and refusing to remain asleep, simply because waking up is frightening. There is a point in every profound connection where waiting becomes its own kind of suffering. You can feel something changing. You can sense distance becoming reflection. You can sense silence becoming a decision, and yet you cannot know exactly what is happening inside another person's mind. This is where wisdom becomes necessary, because the unconscious can create beautiful stories when the heart desperately wants certainty. You may begin believing that everything is proof of what you hope will happen. But psychological maturity asks you to do something harder. Stay open, without becoming lost in fantasy. Love, without abandoning reality. Hope, without turning hope into a prison. This is one of the most important distinctions between projection and genuine connection. When we encounter someone who awakens something powerful within us, we may unconsciously place our own unlived potential onto them. We see freedom in them, because freedom is something we secretly desire. We see wholeness in them, because our own psyche is calling us toward wholeness. This is why a profound connection can feel almost supernatural. When we see courage in them, because freedom is something we secretly desire. We see wholeness in them, person becomes a symbol. They represent something. Conserve. We see free, not necessarily something they consciously intended to represent, but something your unconscious needed to encounter. Perhaps they represent the life you were afraid to live. Perhaps they represent the courage you had buried. Perhaps they represent the love you never believed you deserved. And perhaps they represent the person you are becoming. This is why the most important part of a soulmate connection may happen even when the two people are apart. Because distance removes the external distraction. You are forced to ask, what exactly was awakened inside me? And that question can lead you deeper than any relationship ever could. May slowly become less important as an external figure and more important as an internal transformation. You begin understanding that what you admired in them was also something your own soul wanted you to develop. Their courage becomes your invitation to become courageous. Their honesty becomes your invitation to become honest. Their independence becomes your invitation to stop abandoning yourself. Their presence becomes a mirror, and mirrors are not meant to be worshipped. They are meant to help you see. This is where many people make a mistake. They become so focused on the other person. They become so focused on the other person. When will they finally say what they feel? But the deeper question is, when will I choose myself? That question changes the entire journey, because once you choose yourself, you stop begging for clarity from another person. You become capable of accepting whatever truth eventually arrives. If they return, you meet them consciously. If they do not, you continue living consciously. If the relationship becomes possible, you build it upon truth. If circumstances prevent it, you allow the lesson to remain without destroying yourself. This is emotional maturity. It does not mean you stop caring. It means caring no longer requires losing yourself. This is emotional maturity. It does not mean you stop caring. It means caring no longer requires losing yourself. Perhaps this is emotional maturity. They may be realizing that love is not simply a feeling. Love is responsibility. Love requires honesty. Love requires courage. Love requires the willingness to disappoint old expectations. A person may feel deeply for someone and still remain trapped by fear. Feelings alone do not create transformation. Conscious choices do. This is why the biggest choice of their life may be happening silently. They are asking themselves questions they cannot avoid anymore. Who am I when nobody is telling me what to do? These questions can dismantle an entire identity. And when an identity begins collapsing, the person may become unusually quiet. They may withdraw. They may seem confused. They may appear distant. But internally, they are standing in the middle of a psychological earthquake. The old structure is shaking. The new one has not yet been built. This is why transformation requires patience. Not passive waiting, but patience with the process of becoming. You cannot force another person to awaken. You can only remain awake yourself. Your consciousness becomes the most powerful invitation you can offer. When someone sees that you no longer chase them, no longer manipulate them, no longer demand reassurance, no longer abandon yourself to keep them close, they encounter something different, freedom, and freedom creates a different kind of relationship. A relationship chosen, not demanded. A relationship entered, not escaped into. A relationship where two people meet as individuals rather than two wounds desperately trying to complete one another. That is the kind of connection capable of lasting, because it is not built upon fear. It is built upon consciousness. Perhaps without needing to control what they choose, you can hope without demanding. You can care without chasing. You can remain open without putting your life on pause. And when you reach that point, something extraordinary happens. The outcome stops controlling your identity. You become whole regardless of the answer. That is when love becomes free. And perhaps that is the final choice waiting on the other side of this entire journey. Not simply choosing between you and another person, but choosing between fear and authenticity, between the old life and the conscious life, between remaining asleep and finally becoming who they truly are. And no matter what they choose, you must make your own choice too. Choose yourself. Choose your growth. Choose truth. Because sometimes the greatest love story is not the story of two people finally finding each other. It is the story of two people becoming conscious enough to meet each other without losing themselves. There comes a moment when the choice can no longer be postponed. The person has spent enough time thinking, enough time remembering, enough time imagining every possible consequence. Eventually, there is only one question left. What kind of life am I willing to live? Not what is easiest, but what is true. This is where the old identity begins to lose its power, because the old identity survives through fear. It says, keep everyone comfortable. Do not create conflict. Stay where you are. Do not risk rejection. Do not destroy what you have built. But the deeper self asks another question. What if what you have built was never truly yours? That question can shake a person to their core, because sometimes a life can look successful and still feel completely wrong. A person can have everything they were taught to want and still wake up wondering why their heart feels empty. They can be surrounded by people and still feel alone. They can be admired and still feel unseen. They can be loved and still know they are living a life that does not belong to them, and still wake up wondering why their heart feels empty. They can be loved and still know they are living a life that does not belong to them. They can be admired and still feel unseen. They can be loved and still know they are living a life that does not belong to them, and still wake up wondering why their heart feels empty. They can be loved and still know they are living a life that does not belong to them. The unconscious eventually exposes. They can be loved and still know they are living a life that does not belong to them. They can be admired and still feel uncomfortable. It does not allow the human being to remain divided forever. Sooner or later, the distance between the life you live and the life your soul desires becomes painful. That pain is often what finally creates courage, because courage rarely appears when everything is comfortable. It appears when continuing the old way becomes unbearable. This is why some decisions seem sudden from the outside. People say they changed overnight. They did not seize the moment. The unconscious remembers the entire journey. This is important when you are trying to understand another person. Do not judge their decision only by what you can see today. People carry invisible histories, fears you know nothing about, responsibilities you cannot see, memories they rarely discuss, promises they made long ago, wounds they have never named. The human psyche is never simple. That is why love requires more than desire. It requires understanding, and sometimes, and what you are willing to accept. This is where your own transformation becomes essential, because if you spend all your energy waiting for another person's decision, you surrender your life to uncertainty. Your emotional world becomes dependent upon a choice you cannot make. That is not love. That is psychological captivity. Love can wait, but it should never require you to stop living. Continue your life. Continue growing. Continue becoming conscious. Continue building the person you want to become. If the other person eventually chooses the same path, you will meet them as a stronger version of yourself. Attachment says, I cannot be whole without you. Conscious love says, I am whole, and I choose to share that wholeness with you. The second is far more powerful, because it contains freedom, and freedom is essential for genuine intimacy. No one can truly love while terrified of losing the other person. Fear constantly interferes. It creates control, possessiveness, manipulation, overthinking, suspicion. But when two people are capable of standing independently, they can finally choose each other without fear. That perhaps they are deciding whether they are ready to become the kind of person who can love you consciously. Those are two very different decisions. To choose a person, you need desire. To choose a conscious relationship, you need maturity, you need honesty, you need responsibility, you need the courage to face your own shadow. Because every intimate relationship eventually reveals the parts of yourself you would rather hide. The other person will disappoint you. You will disappoint them. You will misunderstand each other. You will trigger. Love says, Let us become more conscious through what we awaken in each other. Projection demands perfection. Love allows humanity. Projection runs when reality appears. Love becomes more honest. Perhaps this is why the deepest relationships often pass through periods of uncertainty. The fantasy must die, so reality can begin. The imagined version of the other person must disappear, so you can finally meet the real person. This can feel like loss, but it is actually the beginning of genuine intimacy. The same thing happens within yourself. The fantasy of who you are must eventually die, not perfect, not constantly happy, not free from fear, real, because two real people can build something, two masks cannot. And when the masks finally fall, the choice becomes much clearer. No more pretending, no more hiding, no more living according to fear, only truth. And when truth becomes more important than comfort, a person becomes capable of making the biggest choice of their life. They choose the life that demands courage, instead of the path that only demands obedience. They choose consciousness, and sometimes that choice changes everything. There is a moment when the waiting finally ends, not necessarily because someone sends a message, not because someone suddenly appears at your door, not because the universe gives you a perfect sign. It ends when you stop placing your life in the hands of an outcome you cannot control. That is the final lesson of every profound connection. You may love someone deeply. You may feel that your souls recognize something in one another. You may believe that the connection changed you forever, and perhaps it did, but love was never meant to become a prison where you sit waiting for another person to decide your worth. Because when you stop chasing, something inside you becomes still. You no longer need to interpret every silence. You no longer need to search for signs. You no longer need to wonder whether every coincidence means something. You can simply live. And strangely, that is often when the deepest transformation occurs. The person who once needed another human being to complete them discovers that they were never incomplete. They were simply disconnected from themselves. Perhaps your soulmate was never sent into your life to save you. Perhaps they arrived to awaken you, to show you the parts of yourself that were waiting to be discovered, to remind you that you are capable of feeling deeply, to challenge the walls you built around your heart, to make you question a life that no longer felt authentic. And whether they remain beside you or walk another path, the awakening remains yours. No one can take that from you. This is why you must not measure the value of a connection only by its ending. Some people enter our lives and stay. Others enter, change us, and leave. Both can be meaningful. The unconscious does not measure relationships only by duration. It measures them by transformation. What fear did you confront? What truth did you stop avoiding? What part of yourself did you recover? What part of yourself did you recover? What part of yourself did you recover? Those answers matter more than any prediction about the future. And if this person is truly ready to make the biggest choice of their life, their choice will eventually become visible through action. Not promises, not hints, not vague words. Action. Because when a person becomes conscious, their behavior begins aligning with their truth. They stop hiding behind excuses. They stop asking others to carry decisions that belong to them. They stop living two separate lives. The inner world and outer world slowly become one. That is what authenticity looks like. And if their path leads toward you, you will not need to force it. You will not need to abandon yourself to keep them one. They will meet you freely, and if their path does not lead toward you, you will still have gained something priceless, your own awakening. That is the part no ending can destroy. So do not wait for another person to become courageous before you become courageous. Do not wait for someone to choose you before you choose yourself. Do not postpone your life while another person is trying to understand theirs. Walk forward, build yourself, heal yourself, create the life that feels true, become the person you were always trying to find in someone else. And if two conscious paths eventually meet again, let them meet as two whole people. That is when love becomes something beautiful, not possession, not obsession, not fear, choice. Two people looking at one another and saying, I do not need you to complete me. I choose you because I am already becoming whole. That is a different kind of love, a mature love, a conscious love, a love that does not disappear when fear arrives. It becomes more honest. Perhaps that is the biggest choice your soulmate is facing, not simply whether to choose you, but whether to choose the person they must become in order to love without fear. And perhaps you are facing the same choice, so let the old waiting self disappear. When you do not need to know every detail of tomorrow, you only need enough courage to live honestly today, because the future will reveal itself. The truth always does. And whatever happens, do not forget this. You were never waiting for someone else to complete your story. You were becoming conscious enough to write your own. Perhaps the greatest soulmate you will ever meet is the person you finally become when you stop abandoning yourself for love. And when that person emerges, you will no longer ask, will they choose me? You will ask something far more powerful. Does this love allow both of us to become who we truly are? Either way, choose consciousness, choose dignity, choose truth, and above all, choose yourself. Because the deepest love does not ask you to lose your soul in order to keep another person's hand. It asks you to become so fully yourself that whoever walks beside you meets the real you, and perhaps that is the greatest choice of all.